As the South was beginning to secede, or talk of secession, this was not the first time. Somewhere in the 1830s, there was talk of secession because of taxes. And a compromise was reached, and for a while, 30 years, quelled the rumors of any type of succession. However, in 1858, Rhode Island, because of certain things going on with the central government of the U.S., talked and came close to opting out of the U.S. and succeeding. Secession at that time was not illegal. No matter what you read in government schools and other history books, at that time secession was not illegal. Why did the South secede? Why did the original southern colonies, or southern states, and at the end I think it was upwards of 13, at least 11 if not 13, why did they secede? Everybody's going to say, slavery. Well, I've talked a lot about slavery and the mixed emotions that even people in the South had, and how slavery was more or less complex issue of the time. At that time, the South had a heavy trading industry going with their agrarian crops, particularly with Europe. And they were funding through tariffs at the port 70% of the U.S. government. Did they get any of that money back? Very, very little. Most of that money went for northern infrastructure and the building of an industrial complex in the north. Remember, at this time, we didn't go through the Industrial Revolution as the 1900s, but it was starting to take hold. They had the cotton mills and the ginning that they could change cotton into fiber, and then they had the mills that would turn it into clothing and cloth and whatnot, as well as several other tidbits of manufacturing that were taking hold in the north. The southern was totally agriculture, farm after farm after farm. If you want to say plantation after plantation, go ahead, it was a farm, some larger than others. Yes, a lot of states did have in their articles of secession about slavery. But at that time, keep in mind, whether you like it, I like it, or anybody likes it, slaves were personal property. The southern owners had paid good money for their slaves. And to just free them all at once would put an economic burden on these people trying to eke out a living out of the dirt. So again, another complex issue. They did mention it, but I guarantee you, if you read every article of secession of the 7 original states that seceded, you're going to see more and more the taxation. There's an endorsement called the Cowan Endorsement that actually legitimized slavery to keep the South from succeeding. So if you say the South was succeeding just purely for slavery, and they had this article that said they could keep them, why would they secede? They knew they didn't have the manpower. They knew they didn't have the industrial complex to back them. They knew they didn't have the army. They didn't have an army. They knew they were at very long odds, but yet they did. Because of one thing, overreach by the government. Everybody talks a lot about Abraham Lincoln and being the great emancipator. I find his monument in Washington, D.C. offends me greatly. Lincoln was a great dictator. At the time the hostilities were starting to take place. The South had made up their mind they didn't want to play anymore, and they wanted to go their own way. Again, secession was legal at the time, regardless of what you hear. It was legal, no matter how you call it. Lincoln and South Carolina and Fort Sumter became involved. South Carolina had the theory that Fort Sumter was their property. It was an island in their water. It belonged to them. They wanted control of it. They seceded. Give us our fort. Lincoln sent several ships to reinforce Fort Sumter, knowing it would antagonize the folks in South Carolina. In fact, he instigated the firing of Fort Sumter. Not only that, but when hostilities did start, he arrested a lot of legislators from Maryland, and in particular, a lot of government officials in Baltimore. Did he have the right to do that? No. He had no cause, but he did it. He ignored the Constitution. He ignored what little laws were on the books at the time. He threatened any newspaper to write anything that would write anything against him or what he was doing with military force. He did away with the right of habeas corpus, meaning you had a right to trial and all that to answer for the charges. He didn't have to charge anybody, he just took it. His Emancipation Proclamation that everybody jumps up and down about these days could not free all slaves. That's a misnomer. The Emancipation Proclamation carved out parts of Tennessee and Kentucky that were under Northern Army's control. It carved out Louisiana and parts of the Bayou because of absentee plantation owners. Absentee meaning northern gentlemen, if you will, owned the plantations and needed cheap labor, particularly for the rice plantations, and had Lincoln's ear and was also stuffing Lincoln's pocket. Politics is politics. So enough about Lincoln. He was a colonist. He ignored the Constitution, and he basically became a dictator, and those in the North were scared to say anything against him. Also, regarding the Emancipation Proclamation, he had that written at least a year before he made the proclamation. And the reason he would not bring it up is because he knew that a large part of his Union generals, if they even thought they were fighting for slavery, would have abandoned ship. Keep that in mind. Again, this is a complex issue. It's not cut and dried, the History Channel and what you hear on the nightly news and what you're taught in government schools. It's not 1, 2, 3. We proved that in the Revolutionary War. It wasn't a homogeneous effort by the people living in what is now the continental United States. There was a split from the beginning. After the trials of hostilities, or at the end of it, particularly when Sherman came through Georgia and back up through South Carolina, Sherman believed that the South should be eradicated, that the Southern people did not need to be alive. Their philosophy needed to be wiped out. Their way of life needed to be wiped out. I wear this, and I wear it in pride, because history needs to be known. In the taking over of Atlanta, Sherman's cannons wreaked havoc on Atlanta streets, but he did not fire on military and industrial complex. He fired on private individuals in neighborhoods on neighborhoods as such as they were at the time. He was firing not on the military, not on military targets, but he was firing on civilians, Southern civilians, because he wanted them eradicated. Once he left, took over Atlanta and left, he had troops of about 60,000. Keep that in mind. I live in a community of 19,000. Whole county, if it hadn't shrunk. He had 60,000. He had enough troops and support that he would have been the second largest city in the southern states next to New Orleans. His troops were not disciplined. As they came through, they burned, they robbed, they looted, they raped. And if you think they did that just to the white folk, you need to think again. A lot of these came from Ireland. And they were not treated well, particularly in New York. In fact, during the hostilities, there were riots because they were the ones being told they had to go serve. The rich whites of the North could buy themselves out of, I can't think of the term, it was technically the draft, for $300. So these Irishmen were left to fight the war that a lot of whites had bought themselves out of. When they came through with Sherman's army and came through the South, Georgia and South Carolina, they discovered that many blacks had more wealth than they ever thought about. Surprise, isn't it? Nobody thought the blacks could have wealth. But they did. And they had more wealth than these immigrants that came into this country that found themselves entrapped in the northern states. So they were not kind to blacks. They did the same thing they did to whites. Took their personal property, beat them up, burned their homes, raped the women, did whatever they wanted to. And everybody thinks that Sherman's march to the sea ended in Savannah. That's the common thought process. Oh, Sherman went to Savannah and the war was over. I'm sorry to tell you folks, it didn't end in there. Sherman turned his army north, up through South Carolina. And he did the same thing to Columbia as he did to Atlanta. It was burned to a crisp. Houses were taken advantage of, people were taken advantage of, wealth was stolen. And Sherman went on up through the rest of South Carolina, North Carolina, on into Virginia when the war came to an end and Lee surrendered because he didn't have enough forces or equipment. He was beat and he knew it, and he wanted the death to stop. Keep in mind excuse me, that Civil War perished through either bloodshed, fighting, gunshot wounds, or disease. 700,000 American citizens. Yes, I consider those of the South citizens. Still do, always will. They fought for their cause. They fought for independence. But 700,000 folks died. Now you think, well, that was only 700,000. I don't know the exact number of what the population of the United States was at the time. But I do know this, it wiped out at least a third, if not more, of young men ages 18 to 25 of Southern heritage. In short, it almost ended Southern warning. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the split from the get-go. We talked about Lincoln and he's not the emancipator everybody thought. After the war, you heard about Reconstruction, and you've heard a little bit about carpetbaggers and scallywags, but it's kind of brushed aside. I have convinced myself, again, a personal thought, that a lot of the racial tensions that were created in the South were created by Northern generals who tried to get the slaves to impose an uprising against their owners, and they could very well have done that. The farms, plantations, were left to women, old men, and the slaves to keep them operating. And towards the end of the war, it was basically to keep everybody alive. During the period of Reconstruction, the U.S. government proposed to the blacks, and they were trying to get the blacks and the whites split so they could gain control. They wanted hostilities between the blacks and the whites, particularly in the South. So I've convinced myself that this period of time created the racial tensions that we're still living with today. The Reconstruction was not peaceful. A lot of punishment was put on people who supported the Southern cause in the Southern War of Independence, the Second War of Independence for the U.S., if you will. Their land was taken. They were taxed to death. They were taken out of political power. They were not allowed to vote. A lot of the blacks at the time were promoted to high positions in government on purpose, not because they were qualified, not because they would try to rebuild the South, not because they would govern favorably, because the Northern government wanted to create animosity between the blacks and the whites, and they were very, very successful. You hear a lot about the KKK, and no doubt General Bedford Forrest, one of the great Southern generals. There was a lot of confusion as to whether Bedford Forrest had anything to do with the first KKK. I've read where he did. I've read where he didn't. Cannot find confirmation that he did. But the first KKK, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, was formed because of Reconstruction and the government in Kentucky that was being abusive to the folks in the South who supported the War of Independence for the South, of the Second American Revolution. They wore hoods. And this is where the hoods came in, because if then the governing folks even thought they were going to be against them, they were hung. No questions asked. You didn't get a trial. You were hung. If that government thought you were not going to be cooperative and go along with what they said and still be a little rebel, your family was burned out, your women were raped, and you were hung. No questions asked. That's how the first KKK came into being. Now, with any organization, and I'm not defending them, but with any organization that became such a part of it that was a little rebellious than it should be, and that's when it was done away with. It had done what it meant to do, to bring government under control and not punish folks that had supported the Southern cause, and to make things pretty much on an even keel. It was dissolved. It's cropped up, I don't know how many times. Again, it'll crop up one time and it'll go away. Cropped up another time and go away. In the 1950s, there are pictures of the Ku Klux Klan marching on the mall in Washington, D.C., supporting Democrats. Call it what you will. But they were still wearing hoods. I don't know. I don't like people who wear hoods. If you're going to argue with me, talk to me. Even when I get stopped by a police officer and he's got sunglasses on, I want to see his eyes. And most of them have laughed and taken off the sunglasses. But that's a little history on the KKK. Getting back to Reconstruction. The Southern rebellious colonies won the military control well into the 1880s. Notice every other country the U.S. has fought and won, they went into a rebuilding mode and helped the countries rebuild. I'm driving Japanese vehicles right now. They bombed Pearl Harbor. Thought the pond, didn't it? It was not until 1959 that several of the backwoods, as I call it, terrorists were taken out of the railroad. These terrorists, what caused the actions of the 1860s to ship goods south, the northern folks shipping goods south had one right. The southern folk trying to ship to the ports, whether northern or southern ports, had a separate right. 1959. 1959. Think about it. Was when those terrorists were finally done away with. The southern colonies, or southern rebellious states, have been kept and demoralized, or attempted to demoralize, since the 1860s and Lincoln's War of Northern Aggression, as I see it. It wasn't about freeing slaves. It was about power and money and greed. Power, money, and greed. Keep that in mind. This power, money, and greed transferred into the western frontier and annihilated the Native American tribes and their heritage. Go to Cherokee, North Carolina, and go to their Unto These Hills play, and you'll get a different story of what went on. As I begin this, I said we're fighting the same battles that we fought when hostilities broke out in the 1860s. If you turn on the current news, you've got power, money, and greed trying to rub each other out. The common man has been left out. Folks like you and me. Yeah, I've lived a good life. I've lived a very comfortable life. God's been good to me. But these folks want to take part of that away, and I don't live rich, folks. I don't swap Lexuses out every year. I don't take $10,000 vacations every year. I don't fly in private jets. My representatives and senators do. And it's amazing to me how they get into power and they think they have a job for life, and yet they serve. And I don't know who they're serving. But again, folks, getting back to the meat of this, we're fighting the same battle that was fought with Jefferson and Hamilton, that was fought in the 1860s, that has been fought ever since. Does this country want a strong, dictatorial, centralized government? Or does it want individual states' rights with limited federal intrusion? And there's another thing you should consider. When this country was originally founded, senators represented states, thereby giving states a voice in the big federal government. That was done away with. And now that senator represents the people, giving the states no voice in the federal government. And I'm starting to laugh. Some of the most progressive states are starting to fight government intrusion. sanctuary cities, like, whether you like or not, whether I like or not, they're defying the federal government. California, a very progressive state, is basically telling the federal government they don't want to play. So in conclusion, we've covered a lot of topics. You can believe what I tell you. You don't have to believe it. But I will encourage you to read and to listen and read with an open mind about the truth of what was going on in this country. We were split from the start. I'm sorry, we were split from the start. Somehow or another, through many periods, we've lived peacefully. But are we going to live peacefully much longer? That I don't know. Good luck, God bless, and God bless Dixie.